We're going to start now, and I think I call on the Minister to make an opening statement. Minister, 10 minutes has been allocated for your opening statement, after which each of the groups will have 6 minutes each, with a back and forth for questions and answers. Minister.
Count Corlett, thank you. As I laid out in my statement to this House last Wednesday, I have been undertaking a review of my 2016 general election expenses in recent weeks. I also reviewed expenses incurred during the 2020 general election. In seeking to determine the full facts of the matter, I consulted with the local organisation in Fine Gael about any involvement from Michael Stone in both of those elections. The situation regarding support in 2016 was confirmed to me, and I made a statement to the Dail and to the media in this regard. However, the situation regarding support provided in 2020 was unclear. There was some recollection by my team of support being provided by Mr. Stone in that year, but despite my asking directly a couple of times, Mr. Stone's view was that he had not provided such support. This was confirmed to me on more than one occasion. And then on Wednesday night, after my Dail statement, I received a call from Mr. Stone telling me that a member of his team did recall support being provided in 2020 through the campaign team. This prompted his call to me. The details of the support provided are outlined in the statement from Mr. Stone, which he issued earlier today. I was unaware of any of these details prior to Wednesday night. Despite my best efforts in recent weeks to ensure the fullest account of the support given in both 2016 and 2020 was accurate, an amendment will be made to my 2020 general election expenses form to reflect the new information to the amount of €864 for Labour and €392.20 for vehicles for support received during the election period. In addition, I am now aware that an unauthorised corporate donation of €434.20 was unknowingly received by Fine Gael Dublin Central. This was in the form of the use of vehicles, the commercial value of which exceeded the maximum allowable donation limit of €200. SIPO have been notified of this breach, and €234.20, the amount received in excess of the allowable limit, will be refunded to the designer group. An amendment will also be made this week to my election expenses to the value of €1,256 for the work carried out and for the use of vans up to polling day. In addressing the House on Wednesday evening, I aim to be fully transparent. This was, I believe, the case at the time, and the statement I made was an honest reflection of the information I had. It remains the case that when SIPO returns were being submitted in both 2016 and 2020, they were believed to be accurate, as any postering done throughout the campaign was not paid for by Fine Gael Dublin Central nor by me. All activity, it was understood, was carried out by volunteers on a voluntary basis. Neither I nor my team were aware of any payments to any individuals for the putting up or the removal of posters in either election at the time of the filing of returns. The vast majority of posters that were put up and removed in my campaign were done on a voluntary basis. This was, we believe, to be the case with regard to the support given by Mr. Stone. At each point in this, having undertaken reviews aiming to get the full facts, I've always looked to take the appropriate steps to correct the record. Mr. Stone has said that his statement and the information given to me represents his best and fullest recollection of events. Therefore, further steps are being taken. Since Thursday, I have been working to ensure that the information regarding the 2020 general election campaign is completely accurate. I have informed the Dáil of the facts as I have known them that were true at each and every juncture, and I again apologise for the difficulties this has caused and for the distraction that it may have caused and does cause to the important work of government. I, Ceann Comhairle, have always sought to hold myself and those around me to the highest of standards. Finally, I want to say that I deeply regret that this has caused the loss of Mr Stone from the boards of both the Land Development Agency and the North East Inner City Task Force. He gave his time freely in an attempt to make a difference to the lives of those who faced significant challenges, and his experience will be a great loss to both organisations. Thank you.
Now, Deputy Paschal.
Minister, when you came before the House last week with your version of events, I told you were caught out at that time. Caught out concealing donations that weren't declared at the time in 2016. Caught out in relation to, despite the fact that you had information back in 2017 of the use of the company van, that you didn't do anything about it. Caught out when the journalists contacted you in 2020, in November of that year, and you said your team reviewed everything and that there was no need to make any adjustments, that everything was okay. And it was only when SIPO actually wrote to you that you created this narrative here to reverse engineer the numbers to make it all seem plausible. But the question I put to you on 4 occasions last week was the one you could not answer. The information you gave this House was even how many tickets Michael Stone bought off you in a national draw, but you failed to tell us that he paid to put up your election posters in not just 1 but 2 elections. And the reason you couldn't answer that question, because you knew at that time that you were caught out again. So can I ask you a specific question? In 2017, who made the allegation in relation to the use of the company van, Michael Stone's company van, in the erection of the posters? Can you answer that question? Also, when you had repeated requests by media in November of 2022, when you said you carried out a review, who carried out the review? And at that stage, did you know of the involvement of Michael Stone in relation to postering?
Thank you, Deputy Doherty, for your questions. I think it's very important to be clear when you use the word donation. What exactly we are referring to here is an inadvertent corporate donation that I've now declared and will return to SIPO. But the donation that you use repeatedly, at the heart of this is the issue of postering. And the donation that you refer to is the commercial value that is attributed to posters that I did not know were being paid for and that I assumed to be voluntary. So every time you use the word donation, which you're correct to raise, I will make the point back that this refers to postering that I assume to be done on a voluntary basis. The 2 questions that you put to me there is who made the allegation passed on the point in 2017. It was, I believe, at that point, a journalist. I've been unable to determine who. And in relation to the review that I initiated from the end of November across December, which took some time to do, at that time I believed, but it took me some time to establish, that all the support that I received had been on a voluntary basis.
First of all, I asked you who carried out the review. You actually informed the journalists, at least one journalist, that you carried out a review and you didn't need to change your declaration. We now know that that was not true. We now know that 2016 that you got a donation of postering in that campaign and again in 2020. So who carried out the review and how were you able to issue that response in November, another cover-up in relation to this political donation? And in relation to 2017, when it was brought to your attention, what did you do when somebody pointed out to you that the company van was used in erecting your posters at that time?
So thank you for recognising that the donation that we are referring to here is the putting up of posters. It's posters that I assumed was happening on a voluntary basis that has created an issue that I now must be accountable for in relation to the return of my SIPO forms and expenses, which I have done. In relation to who carried out the review, I asked those who were involved in my constituency organisation and my team who've been involved in the campaign. And as I said, up until recently, and I made a return in relation to my expenses for 2016. I believe that activity had been provided on a voluntary basis. At campaign time, we put up many hundreds of posters in Dublin Central. I assume they were all put up on a voluntary basis. That's the nature of the issue.
So just to clarify this.
And then just to answer the question that you put to me then regarding the action that I didn't take in 2017, that is one of the many issues that I hold myself accountable for, Count Corla. I look back at that point, and at that point what I should have done in 2017 when I became aware of the issue is I should have amended my electoral expenses at that time to take account of the use of a commercial van that had at that point a value of €140. It is one of the examples of my assuming that activity had been provided on a voluntary
respect,
basis.
Minister, now you're talking down the clock.
Issue,
well, let me ask the questions. Because you told the media after your review that there was nothing to see here. But you're after telling the House that during the review that you've identified that Michael Stone put up the posters in 2016. You're also after telling the House that there were some in your team that recollected that Michael Stone made a contribution in 2020. Now, Paschal, please come clean on this here. How many posters did Michael Stone put up in 2016 and 2020? And don't take the mickey out of this here and tell us that he only put up 75 polls. Tell us, how many posters were you putting up?
Minister.
Thanks, Deputy, for your two questions. Firstly, to be clear, it was only as I initiated a more thorough review of the 2016 campaign, in the aftermath of receiving further contact, that it became apparent to me that those individuals had been paid, but they were not paid for by me.
It doesn't matter.
They were not paid for by Fine Gael Dublin Central. No, I acknowledge the point.
Matter.
The key issue here is at that point it constituted the declaration, and I accept that point. The key mistake that I made, which I've acknowledged to the House this evening, was an acknowledgement that I had assumed they were all done on a voluntary basis.
Six men, 3 vans, 5 nights. How many posters did they put up?
In relation to how many posters that were put up, I'm afraid I have not been able to determine how many posters were put up. But what I have been able to determine...
You're just
what I have been able to... So, Deputy, I don't know if you're interested in my answer or my head. But what you're going to get is the best answers that I have
and
available.
Last week there you wouldn't answer any of the questions because it is a cock and bull story. And you've been caught out time and time again, not just in terms of accepting undeclared political donations, but a cover-up that has gone on week after week.
To determine, hold on. All the information I have,
please, Minister, hold on. Please do not attempt to shout down the Minister. You've asked him a question, let him answer it. And he will. Let the Minister answer, please. Minister.
As I said, I have not been able to determine the number of posters that were put up, but on the information that has been supplied to me, I've been able to determine the commercial value of the labour that was involved in putting up the posters and the commercial value of the vehicles that were involved in doing it. And they, Count Corla, form most of the revision that needs to be made from an expenses point of view. But as I've indicated to the House, a further revision needs to be made with regard to what I now accept was a corporate donation that I've now acted upon with CIPO.
Thank you. We need to move on. Deputy Jed Nash, please.
Of course, Minister, the commercial value isn't the value that Mr Stone or yourself would ascribe to the value of the service that you describe it as and what you want it to be. It is what it would cost you on the open market to obtain that particular service. Now, we'd prefer if we were here today talking about housing and health, for example, the issues that affect everybody's everyday lives, that goes to the core of the business that we should be doing here in this House today and every day. And they're the real issues that matter. But this matters too, Minister. Standards matter, accountability matters, ethics matters, transparency and full disclosure matters. And I believe that standards matter to you too as well, Minister. And I believe that integrity matters to you too. But today we know from Mr Stone's statement that, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, that you broke the electoral rules on 2 occasions, in 2016 and in 2020. And you have a second chance today to put this issue to bed once and for all, because, as we all know, third chances don't come along every day in politics. So if you genuinely want to make a clean breast of this, Minister, I want to put a number of questions to you. And I'm pleased that you have decided to take the Labour Party's advice and to return elements of what are prohibited donations from Mr Stone to him and to amend your statement to SIPO accordingly. But at the kernel of this is this fantasy that the donations that were made to Dublin Central Fine Gael and not to you personally, the guy on the poster. And I think to address that fiction and fantasy, you need to accept that and you need to acknowledge that these were donations that were made to you and that insofar as we can establish, they did not, as described, comply with the law. So you've doubled down on these as donations made to the party and not to you as a candidate. And let's look, if we can, for a moment at Mr Stone's statement today on this assistance for a friend. And he said, and I quote, "The help given in 2020 was arranged through a member of Fine Gael in Dublin Central." And Minister, this is important, and I don't want to be dragging people unnecessarily into this. Genuinely don't. Who was that member? Was that member your election agent? And it is very, very important to establish that, because it is only, in electoral law, it is only the election agent who can legally authorise expenditure. So did Stone's donations and that expenditure have the imprimatur of your election agent at any time? And is there a paper trail, which is required, between a third party who's providing a service and the election agent? That's required in law. And then furthermore, Minister, if the donation was in fact made to Fine Gael Dublin Central, then if I were the second candidate in 2020, I'd be really annoyed. I'd be really annoyed, because it seems that she hasn't benefited from the assistance provided by Mr Stone. So how did your running mate benefit, if indeed this was a donation to Fine Gael in Dublin Central? And if she didn't, then this is really starting to look like what we believe it is, which is a personal donation made by a corporation that went undeclared. It's de facto a donation made to you personally, Minister.
Thanks, Deputy. I agree ethics and standards do matter. It is why I am so disappointed to be in this position, having to explain who put up my posters, having to explain that I assumed it happened on a voluntary basis, and having to take up the time of the House making a justification for it, let alone having to revise my expenses statements with SIPO. In relation to the point that you've made there regarding my breaking the law, I think was the phrase that you used, it gives me no pleasure at all to hear that statement made with regard to me, which is why I take this issue so seriously. I acknowledge the mistakes that were made. But respectfully, Deputy, it is up to the Standards and Public Office Commission to form a view in relation to this matter, to evaluate my action, my intention, what I've done to try to ameliorate this issue, and I will engage with them in any way. In relation to the two questions that you put to me, who is the person who received the postering at the time? It was the Fine Gael councillor for the North Inner City, Ray McAdam. He received the postering. What was the support that was received to the second candidate, and the point that you make regarding the nature of the account. All of the funding, all of the support that was received at election time goes into the central party political account, which is the Fine Gael Dublin Central account. If I had received anything personally, I would be revising my personal statements, but I did not. All of the funding, any support that was received went in there. But I go back to the key point here. It's important to, again, be clear regarding what is the nature of the donation. The nature of the donation is the value that is attributed to posters being put up. At no point was money received that needed to be put into that account.
Service, and there's a commercial value to be placed on that, and that's a matter that will be determined in time by the Standards and Public Office Commission. I hope that they do their work expeditiously. But I do maintain that this is a fiction, that this donation of a service, which has a commercial value, which is a donation, that it was given to Fine Gael Dublin Central, because that would have implications then for the second candidate and potentially for the second candidate's returns, and that may need to be reviewed. And I'll say just finally, with this limited amount of time that I have available, the Taoiseach said earlier on that he believes you. He's entitled to say that, and he's right to say that people will make their own judgments later on today about the veracity of what it is that you say. And I would ask you to do this, Minister, as somebody who I know values integrity in public life. In the interest of transparency and full disclosure, I would ask you to publish fully all of your returns to SIPO, your amended returns in 2016 and in 2020, including all of the supporting documentation, to ensure that there is absolute full disclosure. I appreciate that you're not obliged to do so, but I believe it would be very helpful and in the public interest for you to do so.
Thank you, Deputy Nash, and I do appreciate your recognition of the value that I do place in integrity and standards, and I am so aware of the issues that I have created due to the postering activity that happened on my behalf at election time. And that is the issue. Who put up my posters, assuming they happened on a voluntary basis? In relation to the point that you've put to me, thank you again for recognising this was a donation of a service. On the point that you've made regarding making information available, of course, I'll make any information available that I'm making available to SIPO. But the one point I will need to check, Deputy, is whether that in any way will impinge upon or influence the requirements that SIPO have upon me. But assuming there's no difficulty there, any information that is available to me that constitutes my input to SIPO and my amended expenses, I'd make available.
We go now to Deputy Roisin Shortall, please.
Thank you. Minister, the point was made last week that the question here is not that errors were made or issues arose. The key thing is, how are those issues responded to when they do arise or when those errors are made? And it has to be said that in terms of your response to this and in terms of your government's response to it, you've made a complete hames of this. And I think that's a charitable reading of the situation. At the core of your defence is you saying that you thought that this work was being done on a voluntary basis. Now, that is a very revealing statement to make. You thought that it was being done on a voluntary basis. How could anybody with any political experience at all think that vans with corporate signage on them and teams of guys in high-vis jackets are doing this work on a voluntary basis? I mean, how could you possibly think that that was the case? And the other point about this is, even if you are claiming that you were completely ignorant of the rules, ignorance of the law, of course, is no defence. And it's particularly not a defence when the breaching of those laws is being done by the minister who is responsible for implementing that law. So, I mean, are you really expecting us to believe that, first of all, you thought that this has been done on a voluntary basis, and secondly, that it was okay if it was being done on a voluntary basis? Are you not familiar with the returns that you have to make every year, that we all have to make every year, in relation to, for example, donations, where under question 3 of the donation statement, which we're all filling in at the moment this month, where there's one question that refers to the nature of donations, and there's a footnote to say, for example, cash, cheque, use of property, services, etc. Now that seems perfectly clear. As a minister responsible for that law, how do you expect us to believe that you were ignorant of it and that you thought this was voluntary work?
Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy, for your questions. So I want to just pick up on the point you've made there, that ignorance in face of the law is no defence. And of course the law, SIPO, will impartially evaluate what has happened here and the consequences of it. So not knowing is not a defence. But I think proportionality in political debate is also a point I would make. And you made reference to political experience, and I know you have very extensive political experience in your many successful election campaigns in the constituency beside me. But I have some political experience too. And I have political experience of being a candidate, particularly in the 2020 campaign, where I was performing a national duty on behalf of my party.
No.
I was very in my constituency
with all due
office.
respect, Minister,
and the reality of it is, and I'll conclude,
now.
I'm going to conclude briefly, but I am going to answer it, that if you're in an environment where the vast majority, if not all of your activities happen on a voluntary basis, The assumption that I made is
Okay,
that a small
I'm
share
taking
of it
that as
was
your answer.
two.
I'm taking that as your answer,
And I
Minister.
just want to make a final point in relation to it, just again to emphasise, my campaign or I was not paying for this.
All right,
And the
Minister,
mistake
thank
that
you.
I acknowledge I made was not checking
Okay.
if somebody else was.
Thank you.
Okay, I've
Deputy
heard
Shortall.
what you've said. So look, there's a number of forms that we're required to fill out after an election. So the election expenses statement from 2016 and 2020. So is it the case then, Minister, that you've amended both of those documents to include additional expenditure?
So the 2016 one has already been amended.
Right.
The 2020 one will be amended very shortly.
Okay, so is there a corresponding correction that needs to be made then in relation to the donation statements, which of course would have been filled in kind of the best part of a year after the election? Surely if you're saying you have to change the election expenses declaration in relation to your expenses in your election campaign, surely that also requires a donation statement correction for both elections.
But I've already said that I am amending my corporate donations form, or that of Fine
not
Gael
on the
Dublin
corporate
Central.
donations.
So I've already
Donations
said,
in kind.
I've already said that a revision will be made to take account of a donation that was inadvertently received to the commercial value of the van that has been used. So I've already said I'm willing to do that.
Okay, but the other aspects,
and then the
in terms
expenses
of
form.
the people who are employed.
Deputy, I'm answering the question to you. We have amended 2016. We will amend 2020 shortly, and I'm not aware of the need to make a revision to any other donations form apart from the corporate one that will happen shortly, and we are refunding back a share of that which I acknowledge should not have been received, but was in the commercial use of a van.
Minister, I made the point last week that what you're doing and the explanation you're providing for these various figures sounds very much like reverse engineering to suit the rules. But of course, that's not the case. In relation to donations, I've already said, goods and services have to have a commercial value and be declared as donations. Now, you seem to be suggesting that these were not donations. You know, Mr. Stone putting up the posters for you, and paying people to put up the posters and providing the vans was not a donation to you, but to the party. Is that correct?
I've made clear on a number of occasions. Sorry, I've made clear that these were expenses that were accrued by Fine Gael Dublin Central.
No, Minister, sorry. You're confusing expenses and donations.
You're asking me a question, and I'm going to answer it. And my understanding, having assessed this matter thoroughly, is the main donation here that needs to be reviewed is that from a corporate perspective, which has now happened.
Okay, I'm not talking.
Excuse me, which will happen.
We're out of time now.
I'm not talking. Just bear with me, just for a couple of moments. I'm not talking about the corporate donation. I'm talking about the donations in kind that you got, with people being paid to put up your posters and the provision of vans. Now, you, as I understand it, said last week that they were actually donations to the party. So how did you?
Point, Deputy, is clear.
How did you? No, I'm looking for an answer to this question. How did you relay? Sorry, how did you relay that information to the party that there were donations to the party?
Please, Deputy
and
Shortall, come
did
on,
you?
will you cooperate?
Did you, as you're required to do, get an acknowledgement of that donation? Because under the guidelines, you're required to get an acknowledgement from the party if you're saying the donations went to the party.
So look, I'm not aware of what this concept is of a donation in kind. What I'm referring to here
Again,
is
you're
an
pleading
expense.
Ignorance, Minister.
And my expenses form have been submitted.
It's in
and
the general election
I
guidelines.
have made clear on a number of occasions that these were expenses that were accrued by Fine Gael Dublin Central.
And did you get an acknowledgement of that,
We're
Minister?
way out of time. We're moving on to people before profit.
These are the
solidarity.
guidelines for the election.
Deputy Paul. Wait, you've had your turn. Deputy Paul Murphy. Please. Please. Deputy Paul Murphy and Deputy McFarry are sharing time.
Did Michael Stone help? Did Michael Stone help with postering in the 2019 local and European elections?
No.
Okay, so Fine Gael was involved in an election. This is a guy who makes donations in the form of putting up posters for Fine Gael in the 2016 and 2020 general election, but he doesn't do 2019. So it only seems to get involved when your elections are involved, when you're standing for elections, is that right?
As I said, the two election campaigns that I'm revising my election expenses for are for 2016 and 2020. If any further change needs to be made at this point, it would be.
Okay, so they look like donations to you as opposed to Fine Gael. But just to confirm, you are saying that the donation of the assistance of the Labour worth €972 in 2020 and the vans worth €434.20 in 2020, they were donations to Fine Gael as opposed to you?
Those, again, the donations that you're referring to are the cost of labour and the use of a van, and they were all attributed to Fine Gael Dublin Central, not to me.
And you also said last week that you sold tickets with a donation value of €334 in 2020 to Michael Stone. Is that right?
Yes, I believe I did indicate that was the case.
And that would also be a donation to Fine Gael North Central, presumably?
No, that would have been to the Fine Gael National Organisation.
Okay, but it's a donation to Fine Gael?
It would have been a donation, as I said, to the National Party.
Okay, so collectively then, in 2020, we have a donation of €972, €434.20, and €334 in 2020. That's a total of €1,740 in that year. Is that accurate?
But we're talking about different things here. So firstly, one went to Fine Gael Dublin Central, the other was to Fine Gael nationally.
That doesn't matter in terms of legislation, Minister.
I'm not aware of what the aggregate is, but I'm sure you're correct. But they went to different party entities. And as I said from the very, very beginning, one was the sale of a ticket. The other was the commercial value that we are attributing to postering and the use of it.
I think this is the problem. When you begin to tell untruths, you begin to trip yourself up, Minister. So it doesn't make any difference where the donations went. If they were donations to Fine Gael, they fall under the rules of donations to a party. So you're presumably aware that if a party receives donations or donations in aggregate exceeding €1,500 in any one year, they need to declare that. Are you aware of that rule?
But my understanding here is that the money that you're referring to and the value of it is below the personal threshold. And as I said, I go back to the point I made. One was to Fine Gael Dublin Central, and the other were tickets that went to Fine Gael.
Again, I'll emphasise that doesn't matter, Minister. You're known to be quite good with figures. €972, €434.20, €334. That's a total of €1,740. When the maximum that can be accepted without being accounted for in the donation statement is €1,500, and yet Michael Stone does not appear on the donation statement. So you're just landing Fine Gael in it with your series of untruths.
But the 430 figure that you're referring to is the commercial use of a corporate van.
Correct.
So what you were doing is you're adding together two personal figures and a corporate figure. They're different. The two personal figures refer to the sale of tickets that I brought forward myself and the commercial value of postering that Mr. Stone himself paid for. The other figure that you're referring to is a corporate donation that came from the designer group, that corporate donation being the commercial value of a van.
Michael Stone is clear.
So just to conclude...
Michael Stone is clear.
Just to
I
conclude,
arranged to supply. I paid.
Ken Corley, not only are we talking about funding that went to two different entities, Dublin Central, Fine Gael and Fine Gael nationally, we're also talking about them being paid from two different people. Two different entities.
It makes no difference whatsoever, the two arms of Fine Gael. You are the minister responsible for SIPO. You're meant to know this stuff. Finally, in 2017, you became aware of the issue around the use of the van in 2016. Why on earth, then, did you proceed and do the same thing all over again in 2020?
No, but you can't, Deputy, make repeat assertions and assume that they have the ring of truth here. Okay. As I said to you a moment ago, the three different figures that you've referred to, the figure of €430, which is the commercial use of a van,
I'll deal with that.
That was from a corporate donation from the Dublin Designer Group, a portion of which will be refunded. The other two figures that you're referring to are personal figures.
Right, can we hear
those personal figures from Mr. Stone
Minister,
are
you
under
may well have
donation
put,
threshold.
You may
I think it's important just to be clear about
Minister,
those
you're
points,
talking down the
because
clock.
an
I want
impression
to
is being
speak.
created that the figures that have been brought forward
You're talking
are in
down
some
the
way
clock
wrong.
and I wish to speak. Minister, you may well have put a new phrase into the Irish political lexicon this afternoon. The inadvertent corporate donation. To lose one parent may be regarded as misfortune, to lose both looks like carelessness. I wonder what the Beld Oscar might say about this debate tonight, Minister, because to fail to disclose election donations and spending once might be said to be carelessness at best, but what exactly is it when it's done twice? Minister, did you receive assistance of this kind from Michael Stone in general election 07 or general election 2011? Did Minister Owen Murphy, before appointing Michael Stone to the board of the Land Development Authority, ask your opinion or canvass your thoughts on that matter? And you were aware of these problems before you were appointed Minister on December the 17th last. Did you inform the Taoiseach that a potential controversy was brewing here? And if not, why did you not do so?
Minister.
So I didn't know Mr Stone in 2007 and 2011. I've no recollection at all of talking to then Minister Owen Murphy in relation to this, but at that point the value of the work that Mr Stone was doing in the North East in the city was becoming very broadly known, and the impact that he was having, because the kind of value he added, the impact he was having in issues was becoming well known. And then in relation to 2017, as I said in response to an earlier question, I do wish at that point I'd revised the donation that was equal to the commercial value of the use of that van. But at that point, the change I would have made would have been at the value of €140.
No.
Oh, sorry, excuse me. I'll come back to that question. No, I did not. I did not inform the Taoiseach.
But you knew there was a controversy brewing.
But what I, at that point, was aware that there were issues that I was reviewing, which there were. I'd received queries.
And you accepted the Minister's position without informing the Taoiseach?
I did not inform the Taoiseach in relation to it, but as this issue has developed, particularly over the weekend, I've briefed him and all the party leaders.
Right, thank you. Deputy Cathal Berry now sharing with Deputy Patrick Tobin.
Gormagat Concorda and good evening, Minister. Can I'm going to share with Deputy Tobin 4 minutes for myself and 2 minutes, the final 2 minutes for Deputy Tobin. Minister, thank you for your opening statement. Just a number of follow-up questions. The first one, you mentioned that you're currently amending your returns for the 2020 general election. When are we likely to get a formal submission of those returns? Is it going to be someday this week? That's the first question. Secondly, if you could outline your engagement with SIPO in relation to this matter. You mentioned last week that you had received a letter, I think last Friday week, from SIPO, stating that there was a complaint had been submitted. Could the Minister outline, was there any indicative timeline in relation to when SIPO will make a decision in this regard? What I'm trying to ascertain is when will the public know whether this complaint would be dismissed or whether this complaint will be progressed? And my third question then, I guess, is this it, Minister? Is there any more information that we need to know? Is every piece of information about this matter in the public domain at the moment? Or are we going to get more disclosures or more revelations in the next couple of days?
Thank you, Deputy. So when will I amend my 2020 return? I expect that will be done this week. What kind of engagement have I had from SIPO? They wrote to me there last week indicating that they would be considering the matter. But they haven't given me any guideline regarding how long it will take or what the process will be, nor would I expect them to. Thirdly, in relation to the sorry, Deputy, I've missed one question from you there.
Just, is this all the information?
Excuse me. Yeah, all the information that I'm aware of here and that I have now taken great lengths to seek to obtain, I've made available. And I'm certainly not aware at all of any further information that needs to be brought. It's the reason why I've amended my election returns in the way I have.
Thank you, Minister. Just a couple of more questions. I guess all the deputies in the chamber are aware that there's a ceiling for expenditure for every candidate in a general election, depending on whether you're a 3-seater or a 4-seater or a 5-seater constituency. So I guess the question is, had the donation of services been properly accounted for, would have that pushed your expenditure above the expenditure limit? Thank you very much.
The answer to that question, Deputy, is no.
And then just the last question, Minister. Again, look, this matter was flagged to you in 2017. Is there anything that you could say to the House and to the public as to why it wasn't acted on, why you didn't recognise the severity and the seriousness of this complaint at the time and take action at the time.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you
Particularly in 2017, I didn't give the matter sufficient attention. And my regret in relation to that, I hope, is evident. I will explain again and again that what this is about is who put up my posters in what is largely a voluntary campaign, and not recognising that a small number of them did go up in an involuntary way. They were paid for. But all that being said, the consequences of it, I accept, are very serious, and that is why I've taken the length that I have to explain to the Dáil and to change my expenses, submissions, and I will engage with SIPO in the way they deem fit.
Thank you, Minister. Just I'll yield to Deputy Tobin. Thank you.
The issue of transparency of declarations is vital to a functioning democracy. And the reason that it's vital to a functioning democracy is because we have a dark history in this state of people in business, people and developers, etc., people with money buying influence with regards what happens in this democracy. And it has cost us phenomenally that type of buying of influence. And I think that the other side of this equation hasn't been really focused upon at all as of yet. So Michael Stone was nominated to the board of the Land Development Agency shortly after the donation. That's significant. Minister, you named Mr. Stone as the chair of the North East Inner City Initiative. That's significant. The Irish Mirror reported as well that your donor received contracts worth $8.7 million over a period of 6 years. I think that's significant as well. And two companies, which Mr. Stone was director of, received 141 payments over six years, including for work that was done in Leinster House. Now, many of these payments were made for contracts through the OPW, which was part of your department. Were you aware of any of these contracts contemporaneously when they were made?
I'm aware of that dark history. I know what it did to our politics, and I don't play any part in it. You just made a number of assertions there.
A number of facts?
A number of assertions in regard to the awarding of state contracts. You know, Deputy, you know that I play no part in determining who gets a contract in this state. You know that. You know in particular that I play no role in who gets a contract from the houses of the Oireachtas. And what you have done...
I've asked a question here. It hasn't been answered yet. And I have only 30 seconds left here. I have only 30 seconds left.
Deputy, what those kind of assertions do is every bit as dark for the future of our politics as the consequences of the history that you refer to. You know I play no role in the allocation of any state contract. You know it is done in an independent, competitive way by the Office of Public Works and every other state body. But not only did you make a number of assertions that you know are wrong, let me also tell you one about that you may not know to be wrong. You said a moment ago that the chair of the North East Inner City Task Force was appointed by me. It was appointed.
You mentioned. You suggested his name for that.
It was appointed by the Department of the Taoiseach. It was a decision that was made by the Department of the Taoiseach, and it's precisely in recognition of kind of issues or concerns that might arise in relation to a task force within my own constituency, that it has been run out of the Department of the Taoiseach.
I have asked a question.
Not any state body or any government department I'm responsible for.
I can't call you. I have made no assertions. I have
time, Deputy.
Please. If you think... Excuse me. If you think,
Tobin, will you resume your seat?
If you think that the presentation of these facts include an assertion,
Deputy, please.
That's very telling in its own right.
Deputy.
But I ask you simple one question.
Please
one question. Did he know about any of those contracts at the time?
Resume your seat.
And it wasn't answered.
Resume your seat, sir.
It's absolutely incredible.
Resume your seat. We move on to Deputy Matthew McGrath, please.
Minister, I don't bear any ill will against yourself and indeed Mrs. Stone, who I believe did a lot of good work in Dublin inner city. And the only problem I see, he was ahead of his time. He was a visionary, because he was seeing a fall until you met him. until 2011, and he changed tracks, so you had a coalition before ever you decided to go into coalition with Micheál Martin. Minister, perhaps the most alarming thing about this entire saga is highlights to us all that the barriers between political and business classes that existed in this country are now almost inseparable, and it is certainly not good time for politics, or good for any of us. In fact, your diary states that you had 12 meetings with Mr Stone during your term as Minister of Finance. Your actions as Minister for Finance was always to bet for the bankers, and bet for the vulture funds, and bet for everything else. In your last actions before you left office as Minister for Finance to go to where you are now was to allow the bankers to get the bonus back again. Now we have over 50 bankers earning £1.5 million plus. Why do people need that kind of money to live in this country? And why are you backing so hard for them? To move on to some questions, please, if I could. You told me the last day that you told the nation on that press conference that Sunday that the posters went up at night. But I asked you the last day, and it's clear as day, they went up in daylight. So do you know the day from the night, or the dark from the daylight? So please could you answer that today and clarify, as we know now that that's not the case. Minister, as I said, in what manner were the tickets that you sold to Mr Stone, what manner of payment? Were they paid credit card, cash, cheque, or whatever, bank draft, or what was it? Or was it pound notes? As I said, Minister, the valuation for the posters presented by you is not credible. Can you provide full breakdown of how you arrived at the figure of 1,057 figure? Because other candidates in your constituency documented figures of around 5,000. And we all know the cost, and we all appreciate the volunteers and the help that we get. We couldn't manage without them, families, friends, and everybody else to put up a few posters. So, I mean, it's not easy. But as I said, Minister, your valuation seems to be very, very much skewed. And my understanding is now there's a second complaint gone in against into SIPO. So, I mean, that's going to take up more time. And this clearly, Minister, the whole saga is taking away from people on trolleys, people on waiting lists, people are waiting for so many other issues, not to mention the housing list and everything else. But as I said to you, you've handled this in a very poor manner, and I think it's time that you put it to bed. Let's move on and try and run the country for the ordinary people that we are supposed to represent, not for the golden circles that seem to exist. And I'm not going to make any allegations about contracts, but we all know what's happening.
Minister.
So the only part of your statement I want to acknowledge in a positive way is the recognition that you have made of the work that Mr Stone did in the North East in the city. This is an approach that many other TDs in this House have called for to be replicated in other parts of the country. And one of the driving forces of the success of it was the work that he did. It is one of the many reasons why, of course, I deeply regret how this issue is developed, and deeply regret that I'm in a position having to make the case for it and defend it in the Dáil. In relation to the 4 points that you've put to me, number one, the fact that some posters may have been put up during the day. I said at the time we're referring to an election in 2016 that is nearly 7 years ago, and it is possible that some of them went up both in the day and at night. And I accepted that. And it's why subsequently I said 4 different dates, I think is what I said. Because it's hard enough to remember what happened 7 years ago with posters going up, and I acknowledge that some could have happened during the day. In relation to how the tickets were purchased, I'm afraid I don't know that. But you know, that is a private matter. But what I can assure you is that all of the sale of the tickets has been done in a way that is compliant with SIPO law. But I made the decision to reveal and to indicate the purchase of these tickets in the House because I felt it was a relevant matter that the House should be aware of. In relation to the issue of the valuation of the posters, so you have made reference to the €5,000 figure, which I think comes from my constituency colleague, Senator Mary Fitzpatrick. I think it's worth again just emphasising to the House that the difference between the two different figures is the fact that the vast majority of the posters that were put up in all my election campaigns were put up by friends, family, volunteers using their private vehicles. And actually, which is what is so regrettable about this, is the actual amount of activity that I now understood was not provided in a voluntary way, which has led me to revise my election expenses statements, was a relatively small share of all of the activity that was going on. But for other election campaigns, they, it appears to me, had most of their posters put up in a commercial way, which is the reason for the difference in the figures. And then in relation to the second complaint, that's a matter for SIPO rather than for me, but I'll engage with them on any matter they raise with me.
Very briefly.
Yeah, briefly, the Minister said on radio and report here that he sold the tickets to Mr Stone. Now he can't tell us how he, was it cash, cheque, bank card, credit card, was it some of the new currencies that you have, crypto or something? Surely you can remember, you said so many, but you don't know. Simple question, should be clarified.
Minister, briefly, very briefly.
Obviously it wasn't in cash, and as I said to you, the purchase of the tickets and how they were registered has all happened in a way that must be compliant with the standards and public office guidelines, but I felt it was appropriate, given the interest in this matter, to voluntarily declare that information.
Deputy Joan Collins is the next listed, but she's not here. So, Minister, you have 5 minutes to respond. Now,
Corley,
we're all debating some up.
Thank you for the opportunity that you have afforded me to respond to the many issues and questions this afternoon. I have done my best to respond to each matter in a truthful and accurate way. It is the greatest of privileges to be a member of the Oireachtas, to represent the constituents of Dublin Central, and above all, to contribute as a member of the Government of Ireland to improving the lives of the people I serve. I have served under 3 Taoiseach in 3 successive governments, and during that time I hope I have made some difference, bringing our national finances to a point of surplus twice, resolving the international negotiation regarding our corporate tax rate, and supporting the workers and the employers of our country during a pandemic. This is not to excuse, and it's certainly not to ignore, the sequence of events that the Dail has just focused on. But it does remind me of the standards that I should have applied with regard to these issues. And those issues, which I'm accountable for, are failing to amend my election expenses in 2017 to the tune of €140 when the use of a corporate van became known to me, of not taking the time to fully determine all of the facts around payments that were made for postering, which again was not known to me at election time, and obviously of not being as involved in the details of the running of an election campaign as I should have been, with the consequences of to electoral law for those actions. But let me just state it again. I was not fully aware of how every poster in my election campaign was put up, who did it and how. And I did not know exactly how that activity was being accounted for. I had understood that help to be on a voluntary basis. I didn't ask further questions, and I clearly should have. These are important matters, and the Standards in Public Office Commission, I know, will consider them further. While this is all that some in the opposition will seek to define me by, it's not all that I have done while serving the constituents of Dublin Central and looking to provide service to our country. I have apologised for my errors in these events, and in conclusion, I do so here again. I take hard-won lessons from them, and I will carry those lessons with me as I continue to serve the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We move now to the next piece of business,